Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jeff. This is Jeff Reads, and today I'm going to be talking about Ian Fleming's novel Goldfinger. I feel like I take deep dives into a lot of books and a lot of writers that nobody reads, but be that as it may, I'm enjoying making my way through the novels of Ian Fleming because I think he's unfortunately neglected thriller writer. He's terrific. So I'm going to be talking about Goldfinger today. So Goldfinger is the 7th James Bond novel. It was published in March of 1959. And the main takeaways for Goldfinger for me is that Fleming really does want to entertain the reader. He really wants to entertain and educate in kind of the way that hasn't been done really until the techno-thriller writers came. He reminds me very much, strangely enough, of Clancy and of Crichton, writers who will do tons of research and then tell a great story, and every episode of the book that they're on will be packed with stuff. So I think one thing I really liked about techno-thrillers is just the intense richness of each thing that you read was just full of so much detail and authenticity. Not that Fleming is kind of a militarist in that way, but he writes kind of, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like Clancy or Crichton kind of read him and I don't know, there was some connective tissue there. Just because he really does, to me, feel like every sequence in a Bond thriller is something new, some new location, some new idea, some new history, some new bit of information. And it's pretty consistent throughout most of the books, I have to say. So, and he's very good at extended scenes. So that's another thing that I don't find in a lot of writing. A lot of popular writing nowadays, short chapters, scene, you know, scene. Film has gone that way too. Like, movies are full of a lot of short scenes. You're seeing less and less in storytelling of extended scenes, or extended sequences. To my mind, anyway, it's sort of like scenes in books and chapters. They get in, they get the job done, and then you move on. For popular fiction, anyway, not literary fiction, but popular fiction. I feel like Fleming belies that. He doesn't do that. He takes his time, and he's able to elongate scenes with really good tension. And I'll talk about one of them in particular in this book that really exemplifies that. And he doesn't resort to me to cheap theatrics. I think sometimes doing thriller tension scenes, you know, it's somebody's kidnapped or, you know, there's a bad guy creeping up on them, or other types of kind of easy theatrics to, you know, there are so many ways to create tension in a scene, you know, and probably a lot of them are a little easy. But Fleming to me eschews those types of things, those really broad engines of kind of conflict. Let's talk about Goldfinger. I just have the urge to sing the really crazy, horrible Goldfinger theme song in the movie, which I will not do right now. Okay, so the opening of Goldfinger, Bond is, I think he's in Miami, in Florida. And he has a chance encounter with a character from Casino Royale, a guy named DuPont, who was sitting at the same Baccarat table that he was at when he was playing Le Chiffre, you know, and bankrupting Le Chiffre, basically. So this guy recognizes him from there, and he kind of says to Bond, hey, I've been playing this guy at cards for weeks at a time. He's killing me, like he never loses, and I kind of feel like he's got to be cheating, like he wins too much, and you know, please help me. Maybe can I enlist your aid at least for a day or two if you're staying over? You know, I'll make it worth your while. I'll buy you dinner, all this stuff. So, you know, they have this long dinner together, and finally Bond says, fine. He's a little intrigued, like, oh, like what's going on with this other guy? So, so it turns out that the guy that this DuPont is playing is Auric Goldfinger. And I'm not going to spoil too much of this novel, but Bond finds out exactly how Goldfinger is cheating him, and winds up, you know, flipping the table on Goldfinger and letting Goldfinger know that he kind of outed him in that same way. So very cool opening scene, you know, just interesting scene about how this is all done. And again, he's cross-pollinating this with other novels, which he doesn't do a lot, but he does do. So again, DuPont's from Casino Royale. And I want to read a couple of things from this opening part of the book, only because to me, Fleming has the chops of a literary writer. You know, he doesn't have the deep themes and the subtlety of depth of a literature writer, but he has the chops. He has the actual, you know, sentence by sentence chops of someone that if he had said he wanted to sit down and write, like, you know, the great British novel, as it were, I think he would have the sentence chops to do it. So the first bit I want to read is a descriptive paragraph of just him setting the scene. And for my mind, Fleming can do more in a paragraph than most writers can do in like 3 pages. So I'm very, very impressed. So just lie back and just let this kind of roll over you. This is when, you know, Bond is in a hotel in Miami Beach, waking up, you know, and Fleming sets the scene. Quote, "The flapping of the curtains wakened Bond. He threw off the single sheet and walked across the thick pile carpet to the picture window that filled the whole of one wall. He drew back the curtains and went out on the sun-filled balcony. The black and white checkerboard tiles were warm, almost hot to the feet, although it could not yet be 8 o'clock. A brisk inshore breeze was blowing off the sea, straining the flags of all nations that flew along the pier of the private yacht basin. The breeze was humid and smelled strongly of the sea. Bond guessed it was the breeze that the visitors like, but the residents hate. It would rust the metal fittings of their homes, fox the pages of their books, rot their wallpaper and pictures, breed damp rot in their clothes. 12 stories from the formal gardens, dotted with palm trees and beds of bright croton and traced with neat gravel walks between the avenues of bougainvillea, were rich and dull. Gardeners were working, raking the paths and picking up leaves with the lethargic slow motion of colored help. 2 mowers were at work on the lawns, and where they had already been, sprinklers were gracefully flinging handfuls of spray. Directly below Bond, the elegant curve of the Cabana Club swept down to the beach. 2 stories of changing rooms below a flat roof dotted with chairs and tables and an occasional red and white striped umbrella. Within the curve was the brilliant green oblong of the Olympic-length swimming pool, fringed on all sides by row upon row of mattressed steamer chairs, on which the customers would soon be getting their $50 a day sunburn. White-jacketed men were working among them, straightening the lines of chairs, turning the mattresses, and sweeping up yesterday's cigarette butts. Beyond was the long golden beach and the sea, and more men, raking the tide line, putting up the umbrellas, laying out mattresses. So just, you know, a wonderful laying out in brisk English sentences, you know, heavy loaded with active verbs. Just, you know, I'm seeing the scene. And, you know, genre writers don't do this. Genre writers are, you know, Bond woke up in the hotel, smoked a cigarette and looked at the sea. And then they move on, you know. But with a couple of paragraphs, Fleming just kind of flexes his literary legs as far as I can see, you know. And it's quite wonderful. So I want to read one more bit of this. He describes Goldfinger when he first meets him. And again, you know, you don't get this in genre writing. This is like a couple of paragraphs of description, but it's wonderful. And you really get a sense of what Goldfinger kind of not just looks like, but kind of what he is, like the impression of what he is as a villain, you know. So here's another brief bit of description. When Goldfinger had stood up, the first thing that had struck Bond was that everything was out of proportion. Goldfinger was short, not more than 5 feet tall, and on top of the thick body and blunt peasant legs was set almost directly into the shoulders a huge, and it seemed exactly round head. It was as if Goldfinger had been put together with bits of other people's bodies. Nothing seemed to belong. Perhaps Bond thought it was to conceal his ugliness that Goldfinger made such a fetish of sunburn. Without the red-brown camouflage, the pale body would be grotesque. The face, under the cliff of crew-cut carroty hair, was as startling without being as ugly as the body. It was the moon-shaped without being moon-like. The forehead was fine and high, and the thin, sandy brows were level above the large, light blue eyes, fringed with pale lashes. The nose was fleshily aquiline between high cheekbones and cheeks that were more muscular than fat. The mouth was thin and dead straight, but beautifully drawn. The chin and jaws were firm and glinted with health. To sum up, thought Bond, it was the face of a thinker, perhaps a scientist, who was ruthless, sensual, stoical, and tough. An odd combination. Amazing. I mean, just, you know, where do you get that in kind of, you know, thriller or popular fiction? You just don't. I mean, to me, it's just, again, it's a dash of literary magic dust that he throws on the book, which is wonderful. So, yeah, I really, really love that about reading Bond. You get all this wonderful stuff, but you also get that, which is the icing on the cake for me. Now we move, Bond, you know, he has that brief episode. He goes back to London, and it turns out that, you know, this is the one coincidence in the book, that there's this issue with gold disappearing from England. And so Bond has to be educated by, you know, an economist within the government. So M sends him out to this gold expert. And we get the economics of gold in, you know, 1959 world. You know, what gold is in economics, where it comes from, how it moves around, why is it so valuable, all this wonderful stuff. So again, Fleming does his research and gives us a nice little kind of primer on the economics of gold, which is wonderful. Then the way Goldfinger and Bond parted in Florida was Goldfinger kind of respected what he did in terms of helping this guy DuPont, you know, get him back. So he turns out that Goldfinger is a member of a very prestigious golf club in London that Bond also belongs to. So it just so happens now Goldfinger has gone to England and he's there. And so Bond is going to try to show up nonchalantly and bump into Goldfinger and see what's what. So they wind up doing that, and so they wager some money on a game. Goldfinger's like, hey, why don't we play 18 holes, and let's wager the money that you got out of me from that last episode. Bond's like, fine. And this game is amazing. First of all, obviously Fleming is a huge golfer. He must be, or he researched the hell out of it. So what you're getting here is it's a golf game that lasts like 2.5 chapters, and he builds tension. So in a weird way, Fleming kind of shifts into being a sports writer because I'm hanging on to this golf game between these two guys. Like I was watching a really good football game, you know, like it's amazing how he did it. And he takes you hole by hole. So the whole game, again, takes place over 2 chapters. There are rising and falling. You know, there are times when you think Bond's going to win, and then you think he's going to lose, and then you think he's going to win again. Goldfinger turns out to be a cheat, and there are ingenious ways where he cheats. The 2 caddies get involved, Goldfinger's caddy and Bond's caddy. And so by using the ins and outs of the game of golf and strategies that golfers employ, some of the strategies that Goldfinger employs as he's trying to cheat, the knowledge of the course, hole by hole, and some of the caddies, their commentary, you get this incredibly tense, wonderfully written couple of chapters about Goldfinger and Bond, you know, playing a tournament of golf together. And it just blew me away. Like I was turning pages, and when I was done, I thought, you know, this felt like this was the last act, and, you know, somebody had nuclear weapons and Bond had to find them. The way that this was done was just masterful. You know, and to me, the best writers can make you turn pages over the most mundane of things. I think that's the genius of really good writing. And when you're done, you're sort of like, they just played golf together. Why was that so engrossing? Why was that so interesting? And it's because Fleming decided to go all in and take all of his knowledge of the game of golf, all of his knowledge of this very specific golf course in England, put those things together with the personalities of these 2 guys, and narrate this wonderful... Actually, the novel kind of lets down after this. To me, this was like the high point of the novel, which was amazing. So it just really blew me away. And to me, it's the soul of good genre writing, where you're all in. You're all into the mechanics and the procedural aspect of what's going on here, because, you know, you're not writing about grand themes of the human condition. You're writing a good rip snorter of a story, hopefully, and this kind of stuff is the wallpaper of what makes stories great, if it's a good story. So just a wonderful sequence. So the novel does kind of lessen after that. At this point, Goldfinger heads to Europe. Bond is chasing him. There's some daring do in and around Europe and Switzerland. Then from there, we come to discover that there is a grand plot in this. I think this was the first kind of really big grand plot. The plots, the big grand plots that the villains have in Fleming are not quite what you see in the movies. In the movies, they're really these global spanning, villain's going to take over the world kind of plots. Fleming's a little more low key. It's frankly, a little more realistic about what happens. Not completely realistic, but a little more so. But this was the first one that really kind of felt like, oh, this is kind of like a movie. This is like a world ender, this one. Not a world ender, but it had stakes, had global stakes. And it's funny, it kind of felt a little rushed and a little kind of perfunctory. It was an ingenious and kind of fun idea that the things were going to happen the way they were going to happen. And you can tell that Fleming thought it through. Basically, the plot at the end of this is that Goldfinger is going to try to rob Fort Knox. So Fleming kind of worked it out. Like, if you had some money and it was 1959, how might you go about this? So there's a map there's an actual real map of the Fort Knox area in the book, because Goldfinger's kind of showing his compadres what his plan is. It's kind of ingenious. But it's a lesser affair. I think it's a weirdly more perfunctory kind of Bond ending. It's still well done and well pulled off. But again, I was a big fan of the golf game, so it was kind of bizarre how I was less entertained by the big grand finale than some of the middle parts of the book. But I enjoyed it very much. It's like probably top 5 Bond novels for me. Really good. Other things that, again, I'm discovering in Ian Fleming's Bond, that is not the movie Bond. Bond's a lot more sophisticated. He's a gourmand, first of all, always with the food. You get some of that in the movies because Bond is an expert in champagne. At least Connery's Bond was someone who knew champagne. But the Bond of Ian Fleming knows food rather well. And I think on Her Majesty's Secret Service, there's a chunk of that, which I also narrated. But I wanted to read one part here because it's so offhand about how he decides what to eat. So here he is. He's I think in France or Switzerland, staying at a hotel, chasing Goldfinger. And so here's a brief thing of him with his wonderful taste. The Hôtel de la Guerre was all he had expected. Cheap, old-fashioned, stolidly comfortable. Bond had a hot bath, went back to his car to make sure the rolls hadn't moved, and walked into the station restaurant and ate one of his favorite meals. 2 oeufs coquettes à la crème, a large sole meunière. Orléans was close enough to the sea. The fish of the Loire are inclined to be muddy. And an adequate camembert. He drank a well-iced pint of Rosé d'Anjou and had a Hennessy's 3-star with his coffee. It's like just this wonderful, this French meal just rolls off his tongue. Like this is Bond's favorite meal, is all this crazy French, these French delicacies, right? You don't get that in the movie Bond. This is very much Ian Fleming's Bond. And again, Fleming's flaws as a man of his time come up in this movie. Bond's big pussy galore is the femme fatale in this movie, and she's a lesbian. And of course, at the end of the movie, Bond's big success is that he beds her, right, and that she wants it. So that's kind of really ridiculous. But he also has some really harsh xenophobia here. The Goldfinger has mostly Koreans working for him. And if you've seen the film Odd Job, the big Korean with the bowler hat, very much in this, so very much gotten from the book. But there's some times when Bond's kind of frustrated with what's going on, and he winds up ordering about Odd Job with some other Koreans, and he says, quote, Bond intended to stay alive on his own terms. Those terms included putting Odd Job and any other Korean firmly in his place, which, in Bond's estimation, was rather lower than apes in the mammalian hierarchy, end quote. So, yeah, woo! But again, Fleming's a man of his time. He was very much like a British colonialist, and Bond, is a staunch colonialist. You know, of course, it's England is the best. You know, they're the highest level of human, right? The best educated, and pretty much, you know, when Bond. Also, when I think Bond went to Japan too, and you only live twice, there was a lot of that crap. So yeah, when he bumps into kind of indigenous populations of some of the, you know, the jet-setting places he goes to, not a pretty thing. But again, it does not really detract from my really enjoyment of the Bond novels as wonderfully well-written thrillers. Fleming's a man of his time, and you know, may we all be as easily pigeonholed as him when our, you know, bills come due maybe 100 years from now. I feel like this is a perennial thing that's just going to be, you know, as more is change and people become more educated about, you know, the human condition, about who we are. This stuff's going to change. So it doesn't bother me. But I do want to include it. I don't want to bury my head in the sand with some of this stuff. It's like, I think authors have feet of clay and they're human like the rest of us. And, you know, with some distance, you'd be like, oh my God, yeah, they had these very kind of subhuman and unpopular notions about people that are quite out of date. But again, I will be continuing on to read more Ian Fleming because I'm surprised at how much I am enjoying the hell out of these Bond novels. Like, it was not something I thought. I think I had gotten one really cheap at a used bookstore, and I thought, let me check out some Fleming. And I've been off and running since then. He's really, really a very enjoyable writer for me. So yeah, so hopefully I will continue on with the Bond books as they come. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.